Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH-FM. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make New Haven tick. Well, the biotech, biopharm revolution is ticking in New Haven, and though you don't always notice it when you read the headlines, they're actually human beings who go into those buildings. Human beings who are discovering new drugs, testing them out, and human beings who are going to be bringing them to market and saving some people's lives. One of them is in the studio with us today. Ron Peck is the Chief Medical Officer of Arvinas, one of the fastest growing companies in New Haven. And he has two sets of news for us today about drugs they're producing. And we're also being joined by Randy Teal, who's the Senior Vice President of Corporate Development, just to help us get the big picture about Arvinas. We have him in once or twice a year to help us just remember that every day while we have our other news we talk about, a revolution is happening in our economy. Gentlemen, thanks for coming in, and it's so nice to have you in the studio.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Paul.
And not a problem now, but I am going to ask you to get close to the mic so you can speak almost like you're almost touching it. So, Ron, you've been working on a drug that just got fast-tracked by the Food and Drug Administration. That means that it's gonna have a shorter time period, if I believe, that you're going to be able to produce this new drug that is going to help breast cancer patients. Am I correct?
Yes, it's called Fast Track designation. It's a mechanism that the FDA has, and you have to apply for it. You submit your available data, the medical need, and your plans. And in this case, the reason why they gave Fast Track designation was that they recognized that this therapy could offer an advantage over existing treatments for patients with advanced metastatic breast cancer. So it's really recognizing the potential of the therapy in this unmet medical need setting.
The drug is called, I'm going to try it, then you're going to correct me. I know it's a hard G. Vepdegestrant.
Vepdegestrant, exactly.
One more time.
Vepdegestrant.
Degestrant, okay, the accent is deg. So that's a long title for a drug that treats metastatic cancer, right?
That's right. It's specifically, in this case, for breast cancer because it targets the estrogen receptor, which is how, in many cases, breast cancer grows, is that it will pick up estrogen that's circulating in the body, and it acts as kind of fuel for the cancer. So what this drug does is it actually directly degrades the protein, the estrogen receptor protein, and removes it from the cancer cell. And it works by a unique mechanism that is consistent with the platform that we're developing. So we're developing a platform of therapies that all work by the same mechanism. And they're engineered to hit a particular...
Hey, see, I'm a dummy, so I don't do the work you do, so I'm trying to understand plain English. When I hear platform and system, that doesn't sound to me like a pill.
Well, it's a pill. When we say platform, it means that we have this, the fancy term is proprietary approach where we design drugs a certain way. And what they're designed to do is to hijack the cell's own machinery for getting rid of proteins, either overabundant proteins, abnormal proteins. It's natural part of the cell's regular.
And is it just by
activity.
taking the pill, or is it part of the way, because when you're having breast cancer, I mean, unfortunately, someone very close to me right now is getting the radiation, has breast cancer. Sometimes you have chemotherapy, sometimes you have radiation. Is this tied into that at all, or is this instead?
So it's been known since the 60s and 70s that drugs that work against estrogen can also be effective as an alternative to chemotherapy radiation.
So is this an alternative to that?
Exactly. So there's drugs, probably the first one that really was used on a routine basis is a drug called tamoxifen. And tamoxifen has been used for breast cancer since the mid-1970s. What that does is it blocks the effect of estrogen on the receptor, but it has its limitations. And so over the last decades, there have been other drugs that are trying to improve upon tamoxifen. And so we have this particular drug that, again, works to hijack the cell's own machinery to get rid of proteins and just goes in directly and takes the protein out, which is very different than what tamoxifen does. And so
this improves, if I'm telling this plain English is right, this improves on drugs that are used as an alternative to chemotherapy and radiation to treat breast cancer.
Exactly.
But metastatic breast cancer, does that mean it's more advanced?
Yeah, so metastatic breast cancer means that it's essentially stage 4.
Mm-hmm.
And that means either it presented that way, and when stage 4 means that it's spread beyond the breast. It's gone to oftentimes the bone, to liver, lung, other locations. So among the choices for patients, and this is specific for patients who have estrogen receptor on the tumor, and that happens to be as many as 80% of all metastatic cancer, stage 4 cancer, will have their estrogen receptor. So this is a therapy, an investigational therapy now, that could potentially impact a large number of patients. 1 out of 8 women are diagnosed with breast cancer, and 80% of those breast cancers are estrogen receptor positive. So this could really work. And drugs that are currently used to hit the receptor are out there, but this has the promise of being potentially better than the existing drugs.
And again, some people still have to get radiation chemotherapy, obviously, because my sister-in-law did. So like that, when won't they have to?
Meaning
if this works.
If this works, those modalities are still going to be part of the standard treatment for breast cancer. But so I'll give you an example. You have a patient who will, unfortunately, they have their cancer come back. It shows up somewhere else, and you do a test on the tumor. You find out that it has this estrogen receptor. Again, 80% of all tumors, breast cancer. And so, what is the standard of care right now? Is to use another drug, works similar to tamoxifen. One of the drugs in this class is called Arimidex. And what that does is it reduces the production of estrogen, and that is the standard of care for a brand new patient, a patient just diagnosed with stage 4. That drug is now standardly combined with another drug, which doesn't hit the estrogen receptor, but works in conjunction with the estrogen receptor drug. So what the future could hold if Arvinas' breast cancer drug gets approved is that, if the program is as successful as we hope, that instead of going for this Arimidex drug, that patients would be receiving the Arvinas drug in combination with this other targeted therapy.
Targeted therapy meaning radiation or chemo?
No, it's a class of drugs. Well, if you
in combination, it's just going to improve the drugs you're getting. What happens as a result? Does it make it more likely you can cure it or put it in remission, or does it mean you're not going to need as much of the other kind of invasive?
What it will do is it will prolong the period of time that the patient's tumor has not progressed, which could be quite substantial based on how the program is designed. And even in the best case, it could actually prolong life, not just how it doesn't just shrink tumors and make it and extend the period of time before the cancer progresses, but it could actually improve survival. And also, for a drug like the Arvinas drug, we also have interest to move it into earlier patients as well, and that's when it can be part of a curative therapy. So
at this point, the first stage, if it succeeds, isn't curative; it's prolonging life.
That's exactly right.
And eventually, it might even cure.
Yes.
All right, we're talking about a new drug that's been fast-tracked for testing and approval by the FDA, being developed right here in New Haven at Arvinas, which is in Science Park and soon to also be at 101 College Street. And Ron Peck, the Chief Medical Officer of Arvinas, is in here, along with Randy Teal, the Senior Vice President. So, metastatic breast cancer. Breast cancer, the way we've talked about breast cancer, just in the last bunch of decades, is we talk a lot more about it than we used to, don't we? There's a lot more efforts at early detection, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly.
A lot more people know people who have actually survived it, correct?
Yes. Well, it's still a highly treatable and in most cases a curable type of cancer. But there are still patients who recur even as they present. So most patients actually, and we get this closer, most patients will present with early stage disease, meaning that it's not metastatic. And by and large, the great majority of those patients do quite well. My own wife is one of these patients, and she was treated.
It's amazing. Everybody has some in the family.
We all do, yeah.
Our congressman talks a lot about her own survival of it, and that was decades ago. She's going strong in her 80s.
Yeah, I mean, the great news is that there's been tremendous progress in the treatment of the disease, but there still is need for better treatments. I mean,
and that's what you're working on. So the FDA decided that there's so much promise, because you were telling me something I didn't know about fast track. I knew we fast tracked, for instance, the COVID vaccine because there was such an immediate need to save lives. Mm-hmm. Am I correct in what I heard earlier, that the reason FDA might be able to let you fast track it is they feel there's so much promise that soon you'll be able to help a lot of people's lives, that it's worth making it move faster, the process?
Yes, exactly.
So what moves faster when you go on fast track?
Yeah, the main thing is that it gives us greater access to the FDA. So the FDA is a very busy bureaucracy. They have thousands of drugs that they're monitoring for approval.
Yeah.
And
no, I'm just laughing because dealing with bureaucracies this day is like one of the hardest parts of life, right? Anytime you want to do something, you got it. Yeah.
A hard part of life. And there's a formality about reaching out to the FDA at different milestones of development. But what this does is it officially declares that Arvinas, and we actually have a partner in the development of this drug. So this is Pfizer.
Okay.
So it started as an Arvinas drug, but because of the promise of the drug, Pfizer joined forces with us. So it's a joint effort. And so what that does, so the allows us greater access to the FDA. That means that we can meet with them. It helps not just in terms of getting together and getting on the same page for how we develop the drug and move it along towards approval, but also once we've completed the necessary studies, the FDA, we have better access to them to help move the approval.
So in other words, you get to get a place at the head of the line.
Yes.
Closer to the head of the line.
We can.
You're doing as many tests, and they have to be as peer-reviewed and everything, but you're not going to have to wait as long for a bureaucrat to say, look at what you submitted to them and decide if it's kosher.
That's exactly right.
Okay, got it. So how hard is it to get this? Like how often?
It's not done, let's say, routinely. You have to submit an application that includes data and a justification for why this therapy holds promise, and enough evidence to say that the potential is really there. Mm-hmm. So, and it's done across all therapeutic areas. Within oncology, it's the minority of cases that are given fast track for sure.
All right. Now you had other news just yesterday from Arvinas, which is a different drug we're talking about. It's ARV-102, and that deals with neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's.
That's right.
At the age I'm at now, we start to think about a lot of that kind of stuff. I know people wrestling with that, and there's a lot of talk now, especially the baby boomers getting older, right? That we want people to have more cognitive ability as they age because they could do so much more than they used to and they live longer. So you have a new drug, ARV-102, and yesterday you had your first healthy volunteer take a dose to test it, correct?
That's absolutely right.
Yeah, and right? I might jump in there, Paul, too, to say that you made the point about the platform earlier, right, that Ron mentioned. And the idea there is that we can use the technology to take part of a drug that binds to one particular protein. And in the case of vepdegestrant, like we talked about, that is the estrogen receptor. But by the platform, we mean that we can take that same technology and then attach that piece, to something else. So we take, as Ron said, we harness the body's own natural disposal mechanism. So one end of the drug binds to estrogen receptor in vepdegestrant, and the other end binds to part of the body that is involved in degradation. So the idea is that we can rapidly link another binder to another protein, in this case LRRK2, and more rapidly develop a drug that could then degrade LRRK2 and be useful in Parkinson's or PSP or other indications.
So is this drug being fast-tracked too, this ARV?
No, not at this point. It's much earlier in development. And ARV-102, which degrades LRRK2, is not the next drug we have in the pipeline. We have drugs for prostate cancer as well. But absolutely, the news that we reported this morning was that we've dosed the first healthy volunteer
Does that mean someone who doesn't have the disease?
That's exactly what it
Is
means.
this the control person? You see how the drug affects this person and then how it affects someone who has the disease?
Yeah. So
I know I'm putting this real basic level. I'm trying to see so I can understand.
These are excellent questions. So unlike in cancer, where oftentimes your first trials are in patients with cancer, usually patients with far advanced cancer, you just begin to learn about side effects and dose and whatnot. In other therapeutic areas like neuroscience, where the drugs can be given at doses that really have minimal risk to volunteers, it's a much more efficient way to study the drug at the very beginning of its clinical testing. So you take healthy volunteers, you measure blood levels, and you learn how the drug behaves in the body. And then once you get that information, you can start to do trials in patients.
I see. So it's not about a test against. It's just watching how it operates in the body. And someone's healthier, it might be safer to do it.
Exactly. And I think one thing I just want to kind of mention is that this is a big milestone for us as a company. So we have two therapeutic areas. We think, and I think as a former practicing physician, it's hard to find two therapeutic areas that are as high an area of need as neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's in this case, and cancer. So that's a great use. That's a great place to test this brand new modality of therapies. So we're really excited that we've started our first clinical program in that setting.
So you talked about being an oncologist. So you've been around this work a long time. First, you were actually the doctor taking the drugs and treating patients.
Yeah.
And so you said you grew up, I think you told me, in
South Jersey.
South Jersey.
Yeah.
Springsteen country or not? Or below that?
Don't get me started. I love Bruce.
Okay. And then you went in, you wanted to be a doctor. You practiced as an oncologist. Then you made a switch to research?
Yeah. My career started in the 90s, and I had a mentor in research. Well, I never really thought this was going to be a direction for me, but I kind of latched onto this because it was at a time, we talk about these targeted therapies and whatnot, but it was at a time where most patients were getting chemotherapy, and there were very few real what are called nowadays targeted therapies. Now there are hundreds of these treatments, but back in the 90s, it was the very beginning, and I was learning from my mentor about doing the first trials of these drugs in human beings with cancer. So these are called phase 1 studies. And it was really exciting for me because, chemotherapy, while I obviously was committed to being a doctor of cancer patients, to be part of the solution. Drugs that would not make you lose your hair, make you sick.
I mean, it sounds like one of those necessary ordeals, chemotherapy, that's just wrenching, but it puts people through.
Well, it's still, it still works for a number of diseases.
I know people need to have it. It's good we have it. It just seems
But
awful.
There's been, but being able to be part of, better treatments that are better tolerated, that can be taken by mouth, that really was exciting to me. And
so you were you were working with someone who was doing a trial while you were still an oncologist.
Yeah.
And something happened and a light bulb went off and you said, I want to switch to the other side to create a solution for the doctors.
Exactly. Yeah.
Why did that happen one day? Was it a light bulb moment? Was it working on that project? Someone said, hey, you can come over to Bristol Myers, wherever they took it.
Yeah, the truth be told, I was at University of Virginia as an oncologist, and my mentor, that was the reason why I went down to University of Virginia, told me that he was taking a job elsewhere. He was really sorry to say that, and he was the main reason I went down there. And I got a call from at that time, the only oncology company I had ever heard of, which was Bristol Myers, because I used a lot of the chemotherapy drugs on my patients. And I also had a strong interest in what's called drug development. I had spent some time at the FDA in my training in Washington, D.C.,
Okay.
and I just love the idea of coming in with better therapies that would make patients live longer, things that were not chemotherapy. And so I would say almost 25 years later, it was the absolute right choice. I've been very fortunate to have worked on a number of things, and I actually, in every opportunity I've had has been better than the prior one, and Arvinas has been a great.
So what's the day
experience.
like? So in the old days, you'd talk to patients in an office, you'd, I assume, operate, right? And now you walk into a lab when you go to work, or is it an office?
For at Arvinas. So I have a team. It's close to about 55 people, and we cover a number of different areas. One are the physicians and what are called clinical scientists that are involved with designing the studies and reporting out the studies and working with all the doctors that we contract with across the world. And then we have a group that are called medical affairs that are looking at how we can report the results to the public and how we can engage investigators to partner with us on different things. And then I have a group that are called pharmacovigilance, which is the group that is monitoring the safety of the drug. So this is not lab work. This is all about designing trials and partnering with them and collaborating with investigators.
And I imagine, so when you're a doctor, almost every day you have the high or the low of like, I just helped somebody out, like I physically did it with my hands, or my advice, or this didn't work out, and I gave my best. It is. How does the satisfaction come in this? Obviously, satisfaction. The first dose yesterday, you got the FDA fast track. Someone showed us, brings you in a study that works. How does that work psychologically in terms of the reward system in your brain?
Well, I'll tell two stories. The first time I worked on a drug that happened to be the first time I worked on a drug that was approved was probably about in 2007. Happened to be in breast cancer, and the way that these registrational studies work, meaning that this phase 3, the studies that get a drug approved, is you basically, it's under lock and key, and finally the results report out 4 years after you start the study. And to see that we had these results in a setting where there were no available therapies was about as gratifying an experience that I've ever seen, because I knew at that moment, on this one day, that this would be available to patients, and that was the case.
I ask that because in so many professions, you have the immediate work of helping one person at a time, and you see the impact. Whereas when you're affecting so many millions of people, you're not actually looking them in the face every day and watching it happen.
I've had experiences where I've got to meet patients that have been on treatments that I've worked on. I will tell you a second story though relative to Arvinas. It was about a year and a half ago. We haven't talked about our prostate cancer program, and we have a drug that is positioned to start the last phase of testing. And a year and a half ago, when it was in what's called phase 1, so the first testing, we got someone on my team got an email from a doctor in San Diego that was participating in our study with pictures and movies of the ocean from a fishing boat. And it didn't show the patient. We're not allowed to know the patients. But the message was, this is the best that this patient has felt. This is a patient with far advanced prostate cancer. He's failed. All the treatments that are standard have already been used on him, and his cancer continues to grow. And this guy finally felt good enough. His pain was reduced that he could get on his bike. So I had a picture of his bike that was sent to us, and a movie of him, a movie of dolphins swimming next to a fishing boat that he was on. So yes, it wasn't our patient. We would not be able to pick him out of a lineup, but that was direct gratification for us.
We're talking about Arvinas and some big advances they've had just in the last couple of days with the drugs they're developing in New Haven. We've got Ron Peck, Chief Medical Officer here on Dateline New Haven, Randy Teal, the Senior Vice President of Corporate Development. So Randy, just to remind our listeners, you're in the 11th year, Arvinas, right?
Yes, that's right. We were founded in 2013.
At Science Park in New Haven.
That's right. Spun out of Yale. Craig Cruz was the original founder. That's right.
And now you got how many employees?
Not quite 450. So we've grown quite a bit in the past few years. Mm-hmm. We've got, as we've talked about with the platform that we have, we've developed and researched a number of drugs that are now all still in clinical trials. Right. We don't have anything yet approved. Important to note that as well. But as we've built out, Ron's team that is running and designing clinical trials, we continue to research and discover new drugs like ARV-102 that we just announced started in trials in the past week or so, and a number of more coming. So right now at our stage, we are looking ahead towards potential, top line or, first pivotal stage data from vepdegestrant that we talked about by the end of the year. And at that point, we'll be looking ahead, hopefully, to submitting the first new drug application and building out a commercial team to help get this drug to patients if it's successful and approved.
And you're going to be moving to 3 floors at 101 College Street once that tower is finished. You're saying next year?
That's right. Early 25 is what we've said for the first folks to move in there.
And you've raised up to $2 billion so far.
Yeah, we've been very successful in that over the years through both capital raising traditionally, but also through partnerships. Ron mentioned one of the biggest partnerships that we have, which is with Pfizer on the breast cancer program.
When are they your competitors and when are they your partners, these other companies?
Well, they are certainly our partners in vepdegestrant for breast cancer, no doubt, which is fantastic because obviously Pfizer has decades of experience in breast cancer that we as a company don't have, although obviously many folks like Ron have a lot of experience in there, but not as a company. Mm-hmm. But yeah, absolutely. We've mentioned a couple other companies that that could someday, if we have an approved product, be competitors as well. But I mean, I think in biotech and pharma, probably the more important concept that we all keep in mind is that we're all in general on the same team anyway. We're all trying to make drugs that work better for patients, and as you've talked about, delay treatments that patients would rather not have.
And we talked before we went on air about you're part of an evolving sector in New Haven that's really happening after decades of trying. Besides 101 College and Science Park and 300 George Street, there's a new tower being built at the old Coliseum site. There's probably going to be another one near 101 College, right at the old College Plaza. So it's really happening. How do you feel as part of that? Do you meet people? Like, do you have a mixer at 5 p.m. on Thursday with people at the other companies? Is there a formal or informal way where you try to meet each other and share ideas? And
there is some of that, absolutely, more formal mechanisms through BioCT and other organizations like that. But there's also a lot of informal. Right? So I've been fortunate to be part of now a second biotech company here in New Haven. I was at Alexion prior to Arvinas. So, fun for me, get to move into 101
College. Did they steal
college.
you at a happy hour?
Yeah, something like that. But now I get to move for the second time in my life to College Street, so that's great.
That's fun.
But informally, there's pretty tight connectivity. There's plenty of people at Arvinas who used to be at Alexion or used to be at BMS or somewhere else. So there's a lot of connectivity between all the companies for sure.
Where do you eat lunch at Science Park?
Where do we eat lunch? We don't have a cafeteria.
We have DJs in the parking lot, food truck in the parking lot's been there for as long as I've been here, which is 6 years. So
and
that
Ricky
is my
D's
most common.
And Fussy
Ricky
Coffee.
D's is there, Fussy Coffee's there. But we could always use more if anybody else would like to move in down there. We would
I always
certainly
wonder at what point you get
that.
the more. You got the 201 Munson Street, this big housing development happening there, and they're building all those apartments. I always wonder, because that's the other thing when they start building Science Park, at what point is there spillover, right?
Yeah.
And at what point, when you build all these towers downtown, will there be a lot more businesses that are supporting? Always curious from economic development point of view what the spillover point is.
I think it's a great opportunity. As we talked about before, I had to do a long distance commute in Boston. It's hard not to work in Boston if you're in this field because it's such a hub. And I had to be on the Mass Turnpike a few times a week and being bumper to bumper, and not to mention the high price of rent and everything like that. So the joke was that my revenge was when I came back to Connecticut, which is where I live, that I would hold revenge and hire people from Connecticut. I can tell you that, from Boston, so I can tell you that we have a lot of folks who work with us from Boston.
Well, good work, guys, on getting just drugs to help people struggling with brain cancer, with Parkinson's, with the next is prostate cancer. You got the vepdegestrant fast-tracked. You got ARV-102 now with human clinical trials. Anything else next we should mention?
Well, it's like I mentioned, it's going to be a big year for us. We've got the first pivotal data coming up, so that's to watch for sure. But it's been great being on your show, Paul. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's really nice. It was really nice to talk to you. Ron Peck, Randy Teal from Arvinas, one of the companies changing the face of New Haven, trying to save lives and give people jobs in the process. Thanks to Doreen and Nora filling in for station manager Harry and doing a great job. Thanks for listening to us on Dateline New Haven. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long at WNHH New Haven's home for community radio.